Well, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, that was a really hard act to follow. It is my duty, I think, this evening to try to respond to some of the challenges that have been put forward by the proposers, such as us not being particularly philosophical about the approach to Islam, us taking particular instances and ignoring the whole. So my job this evening, I think, is to be reflective. And it is also, I think, my job this evening to be conciliatory. I hate being conciliatory, but I'm going to try to be conciliatory this evening. But nevertheless, I will stand by opposition totally to the motion this evening. I'll begin by admitting that there is indeed a great deal of good in Islam, as we've heard from that side in particular. Like all religions, Islam is a supermarket of ideas, of instructions and exhortations that good men can select according to their appetites. The trouble is that bad men can select according to their own appetites too. The trouble with Islam is that, as we've heard at considerable length on this side of the House, is that for some reason, though, although it professes peace and has generated art and literature of exquisite beauty, so giving peace to the sensitive soul, which was one of the barbs that were thrown across to our side of the House, it does in practice seem to inspire violence rather more openly than the other Abrahamic religions. And indeed, thinking about what Mehdi has just said, all the terrorists who were mentioned were Islamic terrorists. That, I think, is something that you should take on board. My colleagues have catalogued a number of its iniquities, and I shall not add to them, for the unspeakable speaks for itself. I would add, however, that when in a few minutes you come to consider how you will vote this evening, then you should not weigh good and evil equally in the balance. It is the case that one evil outweighs one good many times over. For loss of life, inhibition of aspiration, barbaric punishment and imposition, and intellectual stifling cannot be assuaged by acts of hospitality, however generous. All the seas incarnadine cannot wash blood from a religion's hands by an act of piety. The evils will have destroyed a human life, as they did yesterday, and that life cannot be restored by charity. For every evil act inspired by Islam, even though the perpetrator is regarded by the rest of Islam as a deviant, 10, 100, or 1,000 inspired good deeds are not enough compensation. Now, as we've agreed, Islam seems peculiarly suited to the inspiration of violence. It's responding to your challenge earlier this evening at the beginning of the debate. It's appropriate to explore why. For then, no, I can't. For then, we might be able to see that far from being a religion of peace, it is intrinsically and ineluctably one where the opposite of peace, whether that be violence or other forms of peace, is woven into its very fabric, what was alluded to as the golden threads of the fabric earlier today. I might interpolate here, as has been suggested by this side of the House, that by identifying the threads of evil in its fabric, a new prophet guided by the whisperings of a latter-day Gabriel, might be able to generate a new Islam. Let's call it Islam 2.0, in which the glories that the proposers have so eloquently identified this evening are dominant and unsullied. Islam 2.0 would then rightfully be regarded as a religion of peace. But tonight we have before us only Islam 1.0, and it is that version that you must base your judgment on. The West, in order to be conciliatory, the West is perhaps a tiny degree responsible. I will refer to the West and accept some responsibility for the excesses of Islam, but not for its intrinsic character. The West, with its liberal and encouraging attitude towards fellow man and man's intellectual achievement, has perhaps been too hasty in its aim to share its enlightenment. That impatient haste has been perceived as cultural imperialism and has fanned the embers of discontent into sometimes flaming hatred. The West's joy at stumbling into the Enlightenment and its impatient zeal to liberate minds and share personal liberty as soon as possible has perhaps encouraged the seeds of evil in Islam to flourish. But Islam itself must take responsibility for those seeds. It would be a brave man, of course, who said anything against the purity and brilliance of the Prophet, of course, and I must vehemently dissociate myself from the views of the infidel scholars that I am about to share. There are three issues that those disgraceful and disrespectful Enlightenment-liberated scholars so scurrilously identify. One is that Muhammad, if it is in fact true that he ever existed, was a robber baron, perhaps a psychopath, possibly a schizophrenic, and certainly a warrior who made his pronouncements in time of war. Although, of course, none of that can possibly be true, were it to be true, it would account for the bloodthirsty surahs that pervade the Quran and are found in the Hadiths, and the sense that copious bloodshed is the characteristic of a prophet. We only have to look to the modern mafia, the same scurrilous scholars say, to see how control is exercised by barbarity. My second issue is to remind you that if you take the view that the litmus test of the propagation of peace is the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, then Islam, in the view of many of those same scurrilous scholars, is a desert. Article 1 says that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Islam, think of the misogyny of Islam. Take Article 5. No one shall be punishable by torture or cruel punishment. Contrast that with Islam's indulgence in amputation, stoning, and flogging. Take Article 18. Everyone has the right of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and may choose their religion. Contrast that with the punishment for apostasy in Islam, which is death.
Point of information.
No. My third and final, and I think most important point, is that if you take the view that peace stems from a reflective ethics that acknowledges changing times, then Islam, based as it is on the frozen, unquestionable statements of the Quran, is wholly alien to intelligent, rational, reflective civilization.
Point of information.
Nope. Scholars point out that the rules of Islamic law are valid by virtue of their mere existence, not because of their rationality or their sensitivity to progress. Islam, they say, is a religion without ethics, for ethics necessarily involves the questioning of foundations, which Islam forbids. Ethics is intrinsic to good government, and good government is intrinsic to peace.
Point of information.
Strike away ethics, and it follows that you strike away the pursuit.
Ethics as well as no peace.
I'm not taking the point. Strike away ethics, and it follows that you strike away the pursuit and propagation of peace. This evening you've seen both sides of a vision of Islam. This side of the House has gladly conceded that good men will find good things in it, as good men will find anywhere. But we, through examples of the behavior that Islam inspires and often condones, and I, by seeking to show that Islam has an intrinsic fault, long for Islam 2.0. Islam 2.0, Islam's enlightenment, will have an emphasis on humanity, subtlety, harmony, and reason, and be virtuous.
On that point,
This evening, though, you are judging Islam 1.0, not Islam 2.0. By opposing the motion, you will be encouraging the emergence of what most of humanity really longs for, but which does not yet exist. Please, for the sake of humanity, oppose.